I think VR is an incredible opportunity to connect with audiences in a meaningful and measurable way, and in a way that wasn't technically possible only a few years ago. Let's say I'm passionate about VR, and I've been doing this to tell stories for almost 5 years now. But it's important to note that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for creating and distributing VR content. So today I want to demonstrate a number of different examples and talk about the technology that was used to make those experiences, but also the way that they were distributed to audiences. So roughly, the goal of VR is immersion. And immersion is the perception of being physically present in a non-physical world. So what we do is when we put on a VR headset, our brain is tricking our body into believing that what we are experiencing is real. We have an incredible imagination, and some would say it's what defines us as human beings, is our ability to create things in our head. And what VR does is enables us to imagine those things are actually real, making it a very real and physical, visceral experience. So the idea of immersion is key to the power of VR. But for me, the best use case for VR is as a tool for education and learning, because it allows us to experience things that were previously out of our reach. With new experiences comes new knowledge. So this idea of experience, of learning through experience, isn't new. It's been around for a long time. And our worldview is shaped by the people, places, and things that we have access to, and the experience that brings us. And this is where it kind of really gets interesting for me. Historically, our experience of the world has been determined by both access and privilege. Like, were you born in the right place at the right time with the sufficient means to access formal and informal education, or to be able to travel and learn about other cultures and their rites of passage. You know, you can read about these things in books and documentaries, and that's incredibly effective. But it isn't isn't the same as experiencing those things for yourself, and that's what VR can do. For me, VR is the next evolutionary step in the democratization of education and of knowledge, because I would argue what VR offers is the democratization of experience. And I'll give you an example. There's roughly 7 billion people on the planet, and 536 of them have been into space and actually looked down at the Earth from space. And the overview effect is well documented. The idea that seeing the Earth from space brings perspective, and seeing the world in a way that we haven't seen it before. And only 12 people have actually walked on the surface of the moon, and they all happen to be from the United States. They're all men, and they're all white. But now it's possible to travel to remote and dangerous places, to outer space, or to even travel back in time using virtual reality. And it's these opportunities for learning that weren't technically possible only a few years ago. And this is the beginning of the democratization of experience. Now, VR is being used in schools to teach children about people and places they wouldn't have otherwise have access to. And I just find that incredible. It's being used in newsrooms by NGOs and non-profits to tell stories in new and exciting ways. Now, I'm not saying that this technology is available to everybody right now, and it's still in the early days, but the potential is that we will all have access to this technology in the future. It's worth saying that VR isn't new, nor is the desire to create immersive experiences. It was very expensive, uncomfortable, and it just wasn't very good. It wasn't good enough for large amounts of people to want to use it. So, you know, what's changed? Well, it's taken roughly 60 years to get from the lab to the living room. The wearable technology that was invented in universities and military research institutions has now evolved into a slick consumer product available for a few $100s and supported by the advertising campaigns. The big tech companies have got involved: Google, Facebook, increasingly Amazon and Netflix. We're all interested in this as a medium for communication, and that is why it's now actually possible for us to use this. I also want to point out that not all VR is created equal. I mentioned there's lots of different kinds of VR and the ways of delivering it. VR 360 video is typically a passive experience. It's something that you sit back, watch, but you don't have agency within that experience. You don't determine the events that take place. Interactive VR or VR is, as I said, something that you can interact with. You can determine what happens, and that gives you an extra sense of presence. Now I would say that as soon as you put a 360 video into a VR headset and watch that with the headset, that becomes VR. And there's an immersion scale that I want to introduce, in that the quality of experience and the headset we are viewing on, and whether we can interact with the environment, usually determines how immersed we will be. And there are exceptions to this rule. So at this end of the scale we have low-cost cardboard headsets driven by our mobile phones, and this has been the true revolution in VR for me. This is a $10 headset. And as we move along the scale, the technology starts to get increasingly complicated and expensive and out of people's reach for most people. And at the very far end of the scale, we have specialized equipment that's installed in locations, and this is known as location-based virtual reality, because this technology is incredibly specialized and expensive and not within reach of the casual user. And again, the equipment that is used to create these experiences that move along the immersion scale, we have consumer equipment like this Samsung camera that we can buy for a couple of $100, and then moving along cameras that we can buy for $5,000 that up the immersion. We can now see things in 3D. Or very complicated and Hollywood-style rigs that might cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then at the other end of the scale, the kind of technology that we use to create computer games. We're creating immersive, interactive environments, and the production process for this is much closer to creating a computer game than it is to creating a video. And this is pretty specialized and usually quite expensive to do. But it's important to remember that what you might forfeit in immersion, you gain in reach, because more people have access to the lower end technology. So the purists out there who talk about immersion and interactivity, sure, this is great and it's really fun and it can be really effective, but it might mean that people can't actually view your experience because they can't afford to do so, or it isn't available where they live.
So in September 2016, I was the editor of the Arizona Republic. I've only been the editor at USA Today for about 9 months. And Donald Trump came to our state for a rally. He came to Arizona about 6 times as he was launching his campaign. In fact, he launched his campaign for president in Phoenix. And these rallies are in huge arenas, big athletic arenas. And the press is put in the floor right in the middle. And they literally put up metal fences around you. So you are in a press pen in the middle of these arenas. So this rally that I was at in Prescott Valley was like many other that he did, including the moment when he turned to the border wall. And the entire room started chanting, build the wall, and it got louder and louder, and you're in the middle and you hear it bouncing off the walls, and it's quite an experience, and it sounded just like this.
We're going to build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice. Build that wall. Build that wall.
Bouncing off the walls around me, and I just felt a huge responsibility at that moment So as journalists, our job is not to tell you what to think. Our job is to give you the information you need and let you make decisions based on fact. But I was listening to those chants, I thought, do the people chanting know exactly what they're chanting about? Do they know what it would cost to build a wall? Can you even build a wall? You know, who would it help? Who would it hurt? And then the people who are against the wall, same questions. Do they even know how much of the US-Mexico border is currently fenced? And do they know what a wall would help or hurt? So we sent 30 reporters and photographers out to fan out across the border. We did stories, documentaries, podcasts, maps, and so much more. We both flew and we drove every mile of the 2,000 miles of border. And we also held live storytelling nights in 3 cities, in Palm Springs, in Phoenix, and El Paso, where we had people come on stage and tell their true personal experiences of the wall. Our goal was pretty simple and it was pretty audacious at the same time. We wanted to educate America about the border wall. And for us to educate America, we knew that this was a highly political issue. So it was very important for us to be transparent. We wanted people to be able to experience it for themselves. Certainly take a guided tour by our journalists, but go see for yourself. You can look at any part of the map and see exactly what is there. We went and mapped every piece of the border. So we had 6 ways to explore the wall. Again, we have an interactive map that I'll show you in a moment that has every piece of the wall. When we set out to do this, we realized there is no map of the fencing along the US-Mexico border wall. So as we were in the helicopter, we were taking geo-coordinates all along on the video and what we were seeing, and when we came back, we worked with a mapping expert to be able to put that on a map and have a definitive guide to exactly what is there right now. So if the wall does begin to be built, we'll be able to take another pass of the border and show the world exactly what has or hasn't been built. We also had 15 short documentary videos. We had the entire flight that you could watch. If you want to watch all 40 hours of the US-Mexico border, I invite you to. We had stories for people who prefer to hear the narrative stories. We did podcasts, again with this transparency. I wanted people to understand exactly what the reporters saw and the journey they went through. So I did interviews with each one of them for podcast when they talked about, here's what I learned, here's what I thought I was going to see, here's what I actually saw, so that we took our readers along the journey with us. And then, of course, we had virtual reality, which is what we're going to talk about here today. The ultimate experience was the VR experience. So, you know, I'm from Arizona, and fighting about the border is not new. You know, for as long as we've had the U.S. border, there has been disputes over this. Wars have been fought over this. But the president made it the biggest and boldest campaign of his program. You know, people are fighting daily about this, and people have tried to explain what the border is like, but that often gets lost in the news. Most of America has not seen this fence. They have not been there. So we knew that VR was the answer. VR takes away the middleman, and it's no longer a journalist explaining the situation to the viewer. The viewer can step into that environment for his or herself. And when you take away that gap, something really powerful happens. So I know there's a lot of project managers, communication folks, designers in the room, so I want to tell you a little bit about how we did it. We had edited most of this content at some stage during the project, and you all know how that goes. You plan stories, you edit stories, you spot problems in stories, you make deadline. But VR was completely new to us, so we did what any good editor would do. We'd go to the expert. I went to Ray and said, Ray, how do we do this in VR? We had 15 big stories, we had 15 documentaries, we had 3D shapes of the border terrain built from LiDAR data, immersive walkthroughs built from geotiff photogrammetry, and we realized that somebody had to be the guide. So in addition to putting this together, when you're thinking about the story, you're thinking about the narration, and it was really interesting. So not only are you narrating the story, but you're guiding people on the experience. And it's a little weird. It's like reading a newspaper article while also explaining what a newspaper is. Like, follow these paragraphs to the bottom of the column, then turn the page here and keep reading. Now scan another headline. So you're telling the story and you're guiding the experience. So that was new to all of us. But what we did know is that we didn't want VR to just be a gee whiz component of this. We knew the empathy that this could bring. And so we talked about the 3 areas we would focus on. And that would be the Rio Grande here that you see, that you can stand in the river, you can look up at the cliffs. There's a lot of discussion over this part of Texas about how would you even build the wall. You can hear the ripples in the water as you're walking through it. The next location, this is the border wall in California. This is the actual fence that is there now. So you can walk up to that wall and you can look up and you can see exactly how tall it is compared to you. And you can turn around and see the vast desert behind you. And then our final stop was this sacred mountain. This is a mountain that sits right at the intersection of Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico. And it's a religious site and it's a very sacred site. And the wall does not, the current fencing does not go across it. So they have a lot of problems with illegal immigration up from the border to people taking place in these religious experiences and then coming down on the US side. So we wanted people to talk about that and how the feelings are very strong about whether you put a fence on a religious site. So again, we had all these pieces, and we wanted to tell a story. We wanted it to not just be go hop around all these places, but take them on a journey. And so we talked about the VR journey would mirror the immigrant's journey. So that the first stop would be crossing the border and what it's like when you get to the border. The second experience you'll have in VR is what it's like when you get stopped at the border. What happens when either you're passing through or the authorities stop you. We wanted to tell the stories about those caught in between. You know, as we know, a lot of the immigration into America is coming up through Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. Many of these migrants get to Mexico and they get stopped. And so we wanted to tell that story too, about what it's like when you're between, you know, where you've come from and where you're going. And then we wanted to show exactly what is at the border. Along the way, we kept finding more material to add to this, especially audio. Our photographers had a great amount of natural sound squirreled away from their trips, and from the podcast, we had a lot of natural sound that we were able to add into this VR experience. So again, just for the project managers in the room, you know, a little bit about how we did it, how we kept it on track. Our developers were in Slack, we were in Basecamp to stay connected. We had a giant spreadsheet, if you could imagine, with, you know, every single asset and where it existed. And if you think about that, 40 hours of video along the border and every single image and being able to geotag it to a place, there was quite a lot of information. You know, one of the interesting things to think about when you are attempting this is just the storage space. Our video editors and producers, we had to do hard drives. So as we were flying that helicopter, when they would land every day, our photo editor would set his alarm for every 20 minutes in these little hotel rooms. And he'd have to get up and he had to switch out the hard drives as he was downloading all the material. Then he would FedEx these hard drives to USA Today. We made sure we had 2 copies, just in case, of 2 separate FedExes, just in case anything happened to it. So there's a lot to think about when you're attempting the VR that we hadn't quite known when we started. So let me tell you a little bit about what we did learn. You have to have a clear goal and make sure everything you do supports that goal. So my goal, again, was educating America and at the same time being incredibly transparent and making sure that people could see the material for themselves. They could experience it for themselves. You know, you want to be very mindful about your team. We had people who were very experienced, people who were very new to this, but in a technology that is so new, having that diversity of experiences was so important because everybody brought a little bit different to it. Having the designer really art directing it, having the audio specialist really bringing in that sound, you know, having real people just do the user testing for us. And that's a big part of it, is whatever you think you need for QA, double it. Just double it off the thing, because you know you just don't know what you're going to experience as you get into this. It's going to be you know, an interesting process from both the production and the people perspective, and it's best to be upfront about that. Like, we literally looked each other in the eye and said, we haven't ever done this before, and there's a lot we don't know, and you know, we're going to be okay. We're going to get together and we're going to talk and we're going to solve problems. What was amazing about this project is how many times somebody would say, wouldn't it be cool if we did X? And nobody shot them down. Instead, they said, let me find out. Let me go play around. Let me experiment. Let me see if we can get that done. So let's talk about the results. We had about 5 million visits to thewall.usatoday.com. We had about 35 million views of the documentaries on Facebook Watch. We took all those documentaries and we put the little mini docs and we put them into a full-length documentary, which has been in film festivals and is on a nationwide tour right now. I think it's been in about 12 American cities. We'd love to show it here if you're ever interested in looking at Adam. We'd be happy to give you a copy. And of course, we've had, you know, some very nice national recognition, including the Pulitzers. But more important than any of that is back to my original goal about educating America and having that empathetic experience for the immigration experience. So we are very excited for our next project, and Ray's going to talk a little bit about some additional things we're doing in VR and AR. But I'm particularly interested in VR because of the experience we had and just the remarkable reaction we got and the empathy we got of people telling us, we get it, we truly understand. And again, we're not telling you what to think, we just want to make sure you have all the facts as you're making up your mind. And one of the best uses of VR is to create that empathy. I love the UN film Clouds Over Sidra. I'm sure you've all seen that. And one report I read said that a fundraising conference where Clouds Over Sidra was shown ended up raising 70% more donations than expected, which is quite powerful. And the report said that the UNICEF fundraising program found that 1 in 6 people pledged donations after watching the video, twice the normal rate. And you had embedded take action buttons that lead people to the project and follow them to sponsor a refugee family, volunteer to help new arrivals. So we're really looking at your model, the Clouds Over Sidra, for one of our next big projects. We are looking at a year-long project on the pressure facing American teachers. We've had walkouts, strikes. It's quite a crisis in America right now. And I'm interested in, again, the empathetic experience. Researchers at Stanford University, they studied the potential for VR experiences to manifest as truth. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but they took elementary school children and they did one in VR where they swam in the ocean with whales, and then the other one where the kids were read a story about whales. So 5 days later, the children who swam with the whales, they recalled it as a real memory that they had experienced. And the children who were read to about whales, they did not have that experience. So to me, that shows the power of VR and how important and powerful that is and how careful we must be with that. I also think about David's experience about taking people to where they can't be. And so for us in this education project coming up, people have a lot of opinions about education, but for most of them, it's been a long time since they were in the middle of a classroom, myself included. So I'm really interested to put that VR experience, to put someone in a classroom with 35 kids and really help them understand the pressures facing teachers right now. Again, not telling them what to think, but just to make sure they have the facts. And I'm excited to try some of those take action buttons out of it. So perhaps learn about education funding in their state or how to volunteer for education causes. Because I know we can make a difference in both spreading truth and empowering people to take action. I'm super excited about the opportunities ahead, and I'm going to have Ray talk about some of those right now.
I'm really excited to have been invited here to speak to my team's perspective when it comes to developing immersive story experiences. We've been working in virtual reality for several years. We're starting to make a push into augmented reality. But I feel as if we've got a unique perspective considering who essentially my team is composed of. So who are we? The Emerging Tech team is a very small group of former video game developers. Myself, for example, I'm a former art director and worked at EA for about 10 years or so. And when the opportunity had come up, it's actually a bit of a funny story. When USA Today had reached out and said, hey, someone gave us your phone number so you know how to create virtual reality. Now, keep in mind, this was a little over 4 years ago. The Oculus DK1, which is an early development kit, had just come out. I had never even tried virtual reality at this point. But I went in because I was very eager about what is it that USA Today wants to do with virtual reality, specifically as it's applied to immersive storytelling. And I left the initial meeting inspired, honestly. And I was very much interested in being a part of this evolution of storytelling. And I wanted to build a team and work very, very closely with an editorial team, with traditional designers, with something that's a bit more broad that can actually have an impact, specifically with some of the stories that David and Nicole were sharing. But how can we push this even further? So as I mentioned before, our small team is very, very diverse. We've got 3D designers, we've got traditional UI, UX, we've got a couple of engineers and myself. So we're very, very small, but it's one of those things where it provides us the foundation in order to figure out what can we do with this technology, apply it to storytelling, and how can we evolve it. I think it's been a common thread throughout both of the conversations previous to mine here, that how do we treat virtual reality beyond the gimmick? And that is what our team's responsibility is. And I mistyped a bullet there. So how do we work? So what we've done is over the course of 4 years, we've kind of determined a workflow that works for us. Early on, it was more of just experimentation, kind of throwing darts at the board, seeing what sticks and what kind of got us to where we needed to go. But over the course of time, we started to develop an understanding of the development requirements, but again, how we work with editorial, traditional storytellers. The last thing we want to do is just take true video game methodology, specifically development cycles, and kind of just try to, I don't want to say figure things out as we go along, but allow the flexibility to craft the story, to ensure that the narrative that we want to tell is actually being told as truthfully as possible, but making sure that we leverage the technology the way it should be done. So we've got a series of essentially 4 verticals. We've got platforms, users' experiences, storytelling, and audiences. Each one, if you were to start from left to right, kind of each one guides the next, but also provides a bit of a framework for us when we're starting to explore new technologies. What I mean by that is platforms. We're the emerging tech team. We're not the virtual reality team. We're not the augmented reality team. Granted, our focus right now is VR and AR. We want to ensure that we have some flexibility to evolve with the platforms. And I'm sure it's very confusing for some of you. It's confusing for me when I hear folks talking about VR, AR, MR, XR. I'm hearing new terms thrown out all the time, but it still comes down to one thing: the platforms. And this is where we explore not just newer headsets that are coming out. We play around with the cameras. We essentially try to break things. It's an opportunity for us to really get into research and development. But then user experiences. This is very, very important. When we're talking about interactive storytelling, while we understand what we can do with the platforms to create a branching narrative, or let's say UI and how to interact with UI, create something that feels as seamless as possible, it still comes down to, what is it that we're trying to do here? At the same time, does it feel as intuitive as possible? And are we leveraging the technology that makes use of strong user experience types? And that shifts from project to project, but we have something and we have a foundation we can actually build upon and apply to specific projects. And most importantly, it really does come down to storytelling. What is it that we want to tell? Why are we telling it? Are we leveraging the technology well enough to ensure that we're trying to tell the story that we want to tell, but also has an impact? And the audiences. None of this is possible without an audience. Whether it's a small audience or the much bigger, the reach side of things, there are goals for each one of those audiences, and we want to make sure that we're considering them so we can adapt and learn, but ultimately just to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. So our journey started with virtual reality. As I mentioned before, we started 4 years ago, and we've been knee-deep in the technology for several years now. We've done quite a bit of experimentation from 360-degree video up to interactive virtual reality for Vive, Oculus Rift, and some of those other higher-end platforms. But what we've done is we wanted to ensure that we're leveraging these for storytelling, but we also have a very long-term commitment. We're not looking at this as a flavor of the day. Hey, we have to get into this because everyone else is getting into this. But we also understand that the platform is still young. Even now, virtual reality has not hit mainstream status yet. And I think that provides an opportunity for us all to get in now, kind of understand a little bit more about what works, what doesn't work, but ultimately ensure that you're setting the foundation for success. And it will take a bit of a commitment to do that. But it's also an opportunity to experiment, try things, fail fast, fail often. I mean, it's the reason why my specific team, as part of the USA Today Network, is there. It's all about experimentation. When we're not working on projects, we're trying new things out when it comes to interactive storytelling, but also the power of empathy through 360-degree video. How can we experiment with new storytelling types, complex branching narratives. It's one of those development challenges that we were very excited about, but it's something that we are applying when it comes to VR. And we're continuing to expand. We're applying new learnings to new projects. Each project, I wouldn't say, is a complete success. Sure, we might have won a few awards for the wall and some of the others I'll share, but that's never good enough. We understand, especially as former game developers and as storytellers, we could have done things just a little bit differently. So we want to make sure that we're constantly applying. We don't want to get comfortable, especially. So this all started 4 years ago. The first project that USA Today had worked on was one called Harvest of Change. It was a story of a 4-generation farm in Iowa We wanted to tell the story of the issues that is impacting not just their family and their farm, but their community as well. Issues such as climate change, changes in demographics, some of the portions that the family that we're interviewing, there were concerns with the younger generation no longer wanting to farm. They want to get into technology, they move to the city. So we wanted to use virtual reality to get users onto that farm, but allow the opportunity for them to explore the different narratives that were going on through this project. As I mentioned before, this was we built this originally with DK1, but then with technologies constantly changing, so we had adapted for the DK2. This was an industry-first interactive experience, and what I mean by that is there have been other interactive VR stories, but trying to combine, at the time, 360-degree video with a fully rendered interactive experience was very, very complex. We had no reference material to work from. So there were a lot of instances where we were running up against resolution issues, performance issues, but ultimately coming down to the development side of things when it comes to the engineering side. So we ended up actually coming out with a product. It took us about 8 weeks or so. We were very, very happy with. But it was one of those challenges where, hey, let's see what we can do to tell this story, because we understood there was the opportunity between 360-degree video and interactive storytelling. So for us at USA Today, after we had completed our first interactive project, we weren't exactly too sure on where to take things. If we wanted to solely focus on interactive, but we also wanted to get better at immersive storytelling, both in traditional 360-degree video and just interactive VR. So a chance encounter changed everything for us. There was a gentleman that was on our editorial team out of Atlanta, and I put this up here. Essentially, he said he had a friend who might know a guy who was a pilot on the Blue Angels fighter team. And that opportunity led to an invitation to drop by the airfield and install a small 2 GoPro array into the cockpit. And we weren't exactly too sure what we were going to get from that. And again, this is all about experimentation. And this video was created just about 3 years ago. But once we got that first piece back and we rented it out and put it into a headset, we knew we had something special. And immediately we understood that, hey, there's a greater opportunity here to get folks into an experience that they might not otherwise get to get into. So much so that this one video is one of the top performing 360-degree videos on Facebook, just behind Star Wars. And Mark Zuckerberg had reached out and said that he would like to personally post this on his Facebook page as an example of 360-degree storytelling. There was a powerful narrative in here. We were just kind of learning about the pilots and kind of their formations. But again, it was a fun piece, but it was more of just how do we tell a stronger story from what we learned from Harvey's Change to this one. And for a couple years, we continued to really deep dive into 360-degree video, but specifically around storytelling. And what we ended up doing was we created a concept for a weekly news series called Virtually There. It was very, very ambitious. It was another industry first. It was something that we felt comfortable that we could pull off, but we did not really understand the production requirements to pull off 3 unique segments within 1 video each week. But thanks to a partnership with Google and YouTube and Daydream, we were able to get some of the resources to be able to pull this off. And what I mean by that would be some of the equipment for cameras, some of the editing equipment, but ultimately the support that would allow us the opportunity to focus on storytelling and the visual side of things. We ended up doing 2 seasons of this, over 72 episodes, and there was, if you were to look at this on YouTube, varied experience types. And what I mean by that is, on one of them, you're with a wing walker flying over a small farm, and another one's just visually gorgeous, scenes, watching the sunset, in Joshua Park as an example. And then just getting up close and personal with animals and other thrilling type experiences. But beyond that, we didn't stop there. We wanted to actually return back to interactive storytelling. And because of that one experience I told you that changed everything for us, the Blue Angels, the United States Navy reached out to us and invited us onto the USS Eisenhower for 3 days of live combat training exercises in the Atlantic. And this was an opportunity that we were really, really excited about. And we quickly started to kind of figure out, well, what is the story that we want to tell, and how can we do this and do it differently? And I like to consider this the kitchen sink project, because we took everything that we had into this. I mean, every camera system down from the Ricoh Theta up to the Nokia Ozone. That was through a partnership as well. We wanted to do fully interactive, so creating for the Vive and the Daydream. I mean, we threw everything into this. Spatial audio, we had several different editorial staff on to support this. What ended up resulting is an experience that we use these two words often, explore and discover. We wanted to create an experience that folks can actually get onto the ship, explore the ship, but really discover the thousands of stories that are contained within this floating city. Things from actually getting into an F-18 fighter jet for takeoff and landing, understanding what it's like to support 24/7 live operations, getting down into the hangar, to the brig, the Starbucks that's within the ship as well. So all in all, we had over 30 minutes of content within this morning experience. It was room scale. You could actually walk around the ship. You can explore. And it's funny how David had mentioned that folks in VR like to pick things up and throw things around. So as a bit of a hidden Easter egg, just a playful thing, we allowed the opportunity for users to actually pick up the objects, look around, throw them, you'll see it fly around, and kind of snap back into the location. So it's just those expectations for some folks who play around with interactive VR. And ultimately, it was a top-rated Vive app. It's currently 15th out of just over 1,200 apps, which I think is a testament to the opportunity. And I'll share some of the more engagement metrics that we ended up receiving from this project as compared to another one. So what did we learn from this project? It was a logistical nightmare. It was one of those things where we were really excited, and since we wanted to use everything that we had learned, including all the equipment and just our storytelling methods, we had not anticipated what it would be like to actually capture this content on a carrier ship. As an example, we wanted to get really deep into spatial audio. Well, we didn't really consider that with the mics that we had and the steep fluctuations between just ambient noise, then to fighter jets taking off, everything was distorted, too quiet, too loud, so we hardly could use anything. That's one example. A lot of the actual video that we captured, we were limited to applying our best practices when it comes to capturing VR content. Things from where you would place the camera, both height and location. Things such as some scene lines between each of the actual lenses. We gave it some flexibility, but it limited the amount of content we have. But ultimately, it was one of those things where it was just very, very difficult to do. And it took months and months of production to actually support this project. But one of the other challenges as well is a limited UX resulted in low session lengths, especially when you compare it to the wall project, but I'll share some specific times for each one of those. So after we had finished the Eisenhower VR project, which was released in July of last year, we were already right in the middle of supporting the Board Wall project. And as Nicole had mentioned, when she had reached out to me to just discuss the opportunity, we were asking, why virtual reality? Who's the audience that we're trying to reach? What's the story that you're trying to tell? And it was a true collaboration, which is what really excites me most. And it's the reason why I joined the USA Today Network to focus on immersive storytelling. We spent several weeks trying to craft the story based on what we had learned from Eisenhower into this project. But it was one of those things where we wanted to create an experience that really got folks onto the actual order itself at different locations, but understand that this is a much more complex issue. And while the visuals gets you only so far, it was the story that we ended up crafting together that really kind of pulled everything together to make this a unique experience. But from my perspective, again, it's all about the technology. It's what can we do different that we haven't already done. And for this project, we were starting off by leveraging LiDAR. LiDAR essentially is, for those who don't know, it's essentially a laser pulse that is used for topology. Based on the underneath the carriage of the helicopter, flying along these different locations, you have a pulse that was reading the height elevation changes between flying 15 miles by 10 miles wide. And the results didn't exactly get us what we were looking for. We had never done this before. We knew in theory we could do this based on the experience we had in game development. But it was just, it was one of those things where we were hoping to get something a little bit more. At the time, with the technology we were using, if birds would get in the way, it would kind of throw off the reading. Trees, leaves, there was a lot of anomalies that we just weren't expecting that essentially forced us to figure out a different way of creating the environments. And that's where we leveraged a process called photogrammetry. Photogrammetry, for those of you who don't know, is essentially a process in which you take a series of photos, each one with overlap, and through software, the software can determine the changes in 3D depth. And that got us exactly what it is that we were looking for as a foundation to build upon. And this screenshot that you see here is the first result that we had received in process. And we were so excited that, hey, this is going to get us what we need. And I remember sending out several screenshots like, okay, we're ready to move forward. LiDAR didn't get us what we wanted before photogrammetry did, but it was a very slow workflow requiring 24 hours to process each location. And that's if things worked. You have to consider that each of these photos were 100 megapixel, 24, 25 megabytes each, sometimes a little bit larger. So using this location as an example, 1,200 photos, 16 gigs of data, and to process this took far, far too long. But it got us what we needed, and the results were much more promising than LiDAR. So 1,200 photographs, each just aerial, straight down. Millions of polygons would be the 3D model, which is not very performance friendly for virtual reality. Again, it comes down to reach versus immersion and the story we're trying to tell. So we were going towards the immersion side a little bit more, so we understood that, hey, we're going to be focusing on the higher end PC and user side of things. And after 24 hours of processing and some manual texturing adjustments, the results are what you see here. So Wall Recap is a development challenge working through tight timelines with new data sets. We understood that there was an opportunity with LiDAR, but we were able to quickly adapt to photogrammetry. But it was a strong collaboration between all the teams involved to tell the story. So let's compare the two interactive projects and what we ended up learning. I kind of hinted towards the bullets for both of these projects. When you compare the Eisenhower, which was a complex and lengthy development schedule, from start to finish took us about 6 months. But what we ended up noticing, though, is that we had a strong return user rate, but low session lengths. Very, very different on the Wall project. The Wall project was seamless development, pipeline, and collaboration. We knew exactly what we're getting into, asking those questions, engaging very, very early on. We had low return rates, but very, very strong session rates. And what we ended up learning is this was all based on a UX challenge. This was all user design. It was the reason why the two projects were so different. And if you look at the Eisenhower compared to the Wall as kind of a user map, user flow map, with the Eisenhower you had a main hub, and you had the 4 different areas in which you could only go to and from, back and forth. It was very confusing, and when you consider that with virtual reality, especially in interactive, folks want that freedom to drive the story that they, or explore and discover those stories the way that they want to. And that's where we adapted for the Wall project. With the Wall, it's more along the lines of you've got a hub, you have all the spokes, and you have the ring that connects that. So the user is actually able to not only follow the narrative that we're trying to tell over 4 chapters, front to back like you would a book, but also an opportunity for users to kind of, hey, let me go back and experience that again, or jump back in at any moment that they want to. And that's where we understood, based on the metrics we received, were those 2 differences, and we were able to adapt. Now, as I mentioned before, the session time was much, much longer for the Wall project. Our highest session return rate, average user, was about 11 minutes long. When you compare it to the Eisenhower, well, it's maybe a bit more thrilling, only had about 5 minutes or so. 5 minutes is still very, very good for a VR experience, even an interactive one, so that's something to consider. Both were successes, and there were some failures, but when you consider the session length, the Wall project definitely had it there. We believe that's because of user experience design, but the strong, strong narrative, and it was also timely as well. So I also wanted to quickly highlight our journey into augmented reality. I still feel as if this is kind of fits into the immersive storytelling dynamic. And this all started as just a way for us to try to get in early and understand what is it that we can do with this tech. Augmented reality has been around for years, but we understood that now is the right time to start exploring this. So this was a little over a year ago. We spent 4 weeks of research and development. What I mean by that is trying to understand the user experience types, trying to understand the technology and the development requirements to create these experiences. Things from image targeting, which is servicing a 3D object on a newspaper, as an example. Servicing real-time data via a hurricane tracker, which I'll share a little bit more of in a bit. But really, it was just a fun way for us to get in early. But ultimately, the results of these 4 weeks informed our 2018 roadmap, on where we wanted to focus on and where we would kind of adapt things. And our first project was a project called 321 Launch, which is an AR specific app that we created with Florida Today. So 321 was our first AR project. Based on what we had learned from those 4 weeks of R&D, the Florida Today team ended up reaching out to me to pitch an idea of creating an AR companion app for folks who are actually watching launches at Cape Canaveral. Through discussions, we quickly realized that there was a much bigger opportunity there to surface this content and this app for users around the world, and that was by creating a live AR broadcast, which was definitely a challenge to do, but it was something that we knew based on the experience through those weeks of R&D. But at the same time, understanding that the user opportunity for engagement was fairly great if we were able to broaden the scope of an audience beyond just Cape Canaveral. It's a robust app, as I mentioned before, but again, this really just comes down to collaboration. I'll never forget the first meeting that we ended up having with the team down in Florida. The editor kind of just stopped the conversation. You know what, you guys just have to come down here. We were familiar with some of the SpaceX, Atlas V, and everything that's going on there. But to provide that perspective, we needed to go down and learn from those space experts. We were given private tours by folks at NASA. We were taken into the vertical assembly building. We were taken all over the actual launch sites. But really, the opportunity to ask a lot of questions, but to learn from them as well as, what are users, what are your audiences most interested in? And what we ended up noticing is we wanted to entice exploration. Users were very curious to learn a little bit more about what does it take to actually launch a rocket. So we wanted to do something that was, I wouldn't say unique, but something that we ended up learning to create an interactive experience that folks can feel as if they're actually building a rocket and launching it. So from complex 39A, where the Falcon 9 launches from, you can actually get an understanding of kind of the location, but at the same time the process, and understand little unique bits of information, such as the actual water tanks there they're not actually used to cool things down, but they're actually used to dampen sound vibrations because they're so strong that they'll actually crack the foundation. So little bits of information like that, we wanted to encourage folks to actually, and I know I keep saying this, but explore and discover. You notice that we had a very strong engagement as well, not just on the live broadcast, but also the actual interactive experience as well. We wanted to reward the users engaged with strong reactive storytelling. What we mean by that is, it's not necessarily just tapping on something to get a little bit of information, but interacting with something, and let's say the component would build, there would be some animations, visual effects. We wanted to encourage folks to give them that wow moment. And we really just want to bring the story to life through sound and narration as well. And what we ended up learning is we wanted to show how grand the launch is. We didn't want the users to just see the rocket, but we really wanted them to really understand what it does take to launch Falcon 9 in this case. We also understood that there's an investment by the user, especially when it comes to downloading the app. So we wanted to create this experience that would not only encourage them to download the app, but return as well. And that's part of the interactive experience, but mostly the live portion of this as well. And the audience reaction, what this really comes down to. This exceeded all our project goals. More specifically, I'd set out a fairly easy goal, I thought, for us to reach, which was 10,000 downloads over 60 days. Thanks to an Apple feature, the app reached 70,000 downloads within 3 days, which was a very nice surprise to us, and we were very appreciative of the support there. 30 minutes around the actual launch, we had just over 7,000 live viewers watching this launch in AR. And that broke a lot of things, because we weren't expecting that many people to actually download the app. And what I mean by that is, since this is a live AR experience that's pulling in live data, with so many users, we didn't anticipate this. We just couldn't support all of that, all those folks trying to grab that data. We've made some adjustments, and things are very stable now. So, but it was one of those things where it did very well for us, and really told us that, hey, there's an opportunity with AR as well as VR. And next for us, we ended up pushing into integrating augmented reality into our native app. This was a very, very big challenge for us, but we needed to do this in order to support the creation of the City AR trailer, which is a podcast that is still ongoing right now, released just a few weeks ago, and it's a very powerful story. And through that conversation, we understood that, hey, we can tell this story and answer the questions that most people will have after listening to the actual podcast, and that is, What does this environment look like? What does the size of this rubble in a neighborhood just outside of Chicago look like? And we did that through virtual reality, through augmented reality. And it's one of those things where we understood the narrative. We wanted to provide a sneak peek into this, but ultimately encourage folks to really just subscribe to the podcast, to guide them to the podcast and become listeners throughout the entire series. And next up for us was an ambitious test. And as I mentioned before, we did a test early on in which we were pulling live data to power an augmented reality hurricane tracker. We wanted to expand upon that a bit more and see if we can actually meet the demands of a breaking news event by creating a unique AR experience. And we did this a few days ago, just one day before Hurricane Florence had hit the Carolinas. And this just started off by a simple concept and conversation where I went into our daily meeting with my team. I asked them, hey, can we do this? Like, yeah, we can do this. Okay, can we get it done by tomorrow? And they looked at each other and said, yes, we can pull this off. And so while I let them kind of do their thing, it was my opportunity to start reaching out to folks like Nicole and say, hey, we think we can do this. Let's see if we can support this together. And we're able to release this and get this published just before Lent. And beyond that, what we're doing is we're taking everything that we have learned from VR into AR and really expanding the capabilities when it comes to interactive storytelling, but mostly to create a sense of understanding.